That's kind of where it started, actually. I was given a camera at about 10 years old, a really nice camera, and I was told, here's a camera, but don't ever try and make a living with this camera, because it's not going to work. Yeah, so it's like, give it with one hand and take it away with the other. And that's why it took me another 25 years, I think, to start an art practice, So I didn't really start my art practice until I was in my mid-40s. Yeah. I was born in a place called Moose Factory in the bottom of James Bay on the Moose River. It's like an island, just coincidentally. But I was raised in Ottawa. I grew up in Ottawa. Yeah. I think it started super early. Like I just started taking things apart and breaking things and trying to fix them, but breaking them and breaking them and breaking them. And eventually I wasn't breaking them anymore. I was actually repairing them. And then eventually I was making things. So it started really early. I was probably like, I don't know, I think it's like from like 5 or 6 years old. So like I was repairing my parents' dryer when I was about 8 or 9 or maybe 10. It was a mystery to them. And they were always afraid of electronic devices and any kind of mechanical devices. So. The whole artistic side of things didn't happen till a lot later. I think it was when I was about 18 or 19, I met a painter. And she just kind of blew my mind with what she was able to do. She gave me a paintbrush and a pot of cobalt blue paint, and she kind of gave me license to do whatever the hell I wanted to do. No, I decided to study architecture for like 7 years. And then I think the experience of architecture, the architecture school, for me, it was more interesting learning about how other people were learning and how I was learning than the architecture. So I ended up not practicing architecture and actually focusing more on education for about another 10 years after that. I ended up in East Germany after the wall came down and was with a couple of other guys, architects as well. We were doing these sort of interdisciplinary international workshops that were essentially just explorations of creativity in an environment where there was massive change happening politically and socially. And then when I moved to Nelson after that, I was still teaching for another 10 years, but I started, my partner actually couldn't get work. She's also an architect. It was really difficult as a German citizen to transport her degree to Canada. So she started doing pottery and ceramics, and I was teaching at Kootenai School of the Arts in Nelson, and then I started doing ceramics with her, and we did that for about 10 years while I was teaching. Actually, the Bauhaus influenced pretty much all architecture, art, and design curriculum from the 1920s onward, including where I studied at Carleton University. So by the time I got to the Bauhaus, I was kind of over the Bauhaus, actually. I was kind of, it was a great experience and opportunity because the whole country was just completely shifting. But being at the Bauhaus and working in the Bauhaus was kind of strange. It was a real weight, I think, for the people there, that sort of history and that legacy. And I didn't necessarily feel that. But, I mean, after studying for as long as I did, you're kind of infected by that aesthetic. Not drawing, that's one thing, but I don't know. I mean, I think working in craft-based practices, I mean, the first one that I spent a lot of time really working on was ceramics. And that one was really fantastic for understanding what my hands could do. But, it evolves. I think if I'd studied ceramics, I might still be making ceramics, but having studied architecture, it kind of gives you a license to do whatever you want. And then you kind of look around, and different projects require different materials and different approaches. So, studying architecture kind of gave, not only did it give me permission to do what I wanted, but it kind of gave me the ability and the fearlessness you need to actually embark on things where you really don't know what the hell you're doing and go there anyway. Eventually, I got to a point where I had too many things anyway, and I started exploring hoarding as an idea. And I had a residency in Dawson Creek, and the one thing that I didn't want to do was to bring anything back from that residency. And so I think that's where the first video project started happening, the first multi-screen video project, where I built an enormous wall of newspaper and then collapsed the newspaper wall with 6 different cameras. And then they have this amazing ramp in Dawson Creek. It's around the inside of I don't think it's a grain elevator, but it's next to a grain elevator. It's another kind of storage building, but it's tall and vertical. And they had about a 200-foot ramp in the building around the perimeter. And so I set up TVs along that ramp every 15 feet or so with the video of the collapsing wall from different angles. And yeah. The last few pieces, it's been the dancers and the musicians. I've been working with Don McDonald. This is the second piece we've done together. And it's just been a fantastic experience. Nelson's a really rich community. One of the dancers runs a dance school. The other one is an actor who also studied dance or does dance work in the theater. Another one is a professional dancer who she'd been in New York for 25 years and moved to Nelson to take care of her mother. So they're just, one thing leads to another. It's like, I need 2 people. And so I ended up working with 3, even though there are only 2 dancers in any of the videos, because some people were just too busy. And that was great, because now I have 3 dancers that I can work with. And really, they were the choreographers. I would give them ideas. And because they were so professional, they would often say, well, let's try this or let's try that. And then I would go further and change it around. And then with the music, the last piece I did, I wanted to have, I had probably 15 vignettes, and I wanted to have 15 different musicians. And I started talking to Don McDonald about it, and he was horrified at the thought of trying to sort of rein in 15 different musical directions in one piece. And so I thought, okay, well, let's just see how that unfolds with Don, the way that he'd like to do it. And in the end, he didn't even want to see the piece until it was completely finished. And did the same thing this time. And then it's a process of unfolding and seeing how he reads it. And most of the time for the first, he would do 10, 15 different approaches, and I would have to keep coming back and saying no. And he was fantastic, because working composing for film and television, that's what he has to contend with on a daily basis. So he dealt with that without any problem. And then in this piece, I managed to squeak in 2 other musicians. And Don didn't get too mad at me, but I think it was irritating to him, because he had to kind of figure out how to weave these 2 voices along with his own voice. And I think he did a great job. The costumes, that was one of those parameters that I kind of got. I had the idea that they would end up having more and more layers with each subsequent scene. And so I started shooting these scenes not having the narrative yet. but the costumes kept getting bigger. And then when I finally figured out what the narrative was, that it was the life and times of one person, then it very much hemmed me in, because I couldn't change it back. I couldn't take things away from the costume and reshoot something. It was more what I expressed, and what I didn't express. It was an interesting unfolding. The whole idea of a narrative in the work is something new to me, really, since I started working in video. Because when you're working in sculpture, there's a story, there's a backstory usually, but there's not a narrative as such. And when I started working with Don, he was like, okay, well, what's the narrative? And I'm like, well, there is no narrative. It was a series of vignettes in there, And so when I did this piece, knowing that I was going to work with Don again, I was kind of obsessed about what the narrative was going to be. And at first it was the two different kinds of technologies, and each of the dancers would represent one of the technologies. And for the longest time, there was no narrative. And I knew that there had to be a relationship between these two. And there is a relationship between the two technologies. I mean, one is essentially taking over the other, or eliminating its usefulness. And they sometimes complement each other as well. But there's no narrative there. And it wasn't until I started thinking about the left and right hemispheres of the brain, sort of superimposing those on the two different kinds of technologies, that I realized it was one person. And so, and then it unfolded into being one person's sort of life story from beginning to end, with points in it that are some not important, some important. Only that the viewers need to think of themselves as being choreographed by the work, and not, default to the standard being glued to one screen and from one position in the room. The room is really big, and so people are meant to actually dance in it, in a way. I mean, the very first glimmer of that project, I had this sort of image of an 85-year-old Spanish dance instructor barking instructions. I want to do a live video of her barking instructions at the audience and telling them what to do so that they could find their own dance. That obviously evolved since then, but that's kind of how this project started about 5 years ago. The idea of working with dancers came out of that, which literally came from a dream, which was just a fleeting moment, but sometimes that's how a seed for a project works. I don't know that it's changed a whole lot. It's kind of a compulsion in a way. I mean, to make things and to do creative work. I feel incredibly fortunate and privileged to be able to do it, and to have gotten, the encouragement from my peers in terms of support from funding bodies that are juried by peers. So I'm always amazed that I can continue to do this, and but I don't think my relationship to it's actually changed a whole lot. I may have slowed down a little bit, but not so much. Still very much in video, and that form, the four-screen form, and the relationship between the audience and the screens and being immersed in them, I'm still very much attached to. This is the first piece, though, where I've done a lot of different things in terms of working with dancers. So working with, and it's funny that I ended up doing this, because the first video installation that I did was, they've always been about the choreography of the viewer. Like on the ramp, the viewer was walking up the ramp. And in the last one that I did, Fine Line Check Check, that was about obsessive compulsive behavior. It also attempted to get the viewer or the audience to move in the space instead of just being attached to the video screen the way that we are accustomed to. I mean, that's really the reason for working in a larger format and in a multiple channel video in a room, like creating a room. It didn't really work in the last piece, so I've tried it again in this piece. But interestingly, what's ended up happening is working with dancers has kind of pushed me into the role of being a choreographer in a way. I mean, I tried to avoid it because I didn't want to start a new direction, but I mean, it's part of it. I was talking with some dancers a few weeks ago, and they were wanting to show the piece or some of the pieces from this live, which I hadn't even considered up till then. And I'm a little bit reluctant. I want to kind of continue. I'm not ready to escape this medium, let's put it that way. So.